Well, joining me from Sydney to discuss your Friday feedback and more, 2GB Radio host, the wonderful Luke Grant.
Hi, Peter.
Well, I tell you what, Luke, it is the place for common sense. My viewers and my Facebook contributors there today, particularly in relation to Anastasia Palaszczuk, $300 billion we are, not the Commonwealth Government, not Scott Morrison, we federal taxpayers are already on the hook.
Yep.
Do we need more money to bail out Anastasia Palaszczuk?
Well, this is a really interesting debate because we're all Australian. We're meant to be all in this together. So if our brothers and sisters in Queensland need a hand, we should be in a position to do that, except that a line has been somewhat drawn in the sand, and it was drawn in the sand by the Queensland Premier, who said that, no, we'll look after things here on our own, thank you very much. We'll just shut the border. As a friend told me once, a monkey could have done that. But they look at the press conference and the numbers the next day, don't they, at 11 o'clock or 12 o'clock. It's a number of cases. What's never taken into account is the long-term financial cost to the state, is the mental health outcome long-term, and there are enough learned people around to give them meaningful projections. And this is, as sadly it does become a bit of a state of origin debate, Peter, where, you love your Premier, even though it might be someone you don't normally support, like a player that plays for your state but not for your favourite club. It becomes a bit state of origin. So premiers at home are rating 50 or 60 or 70%. I'd love to see the figures around the rest of the country, even if all they've done is shut the borders and maintain that for doing that, they've kept people safe and stopped them from dying. Some of the feedback we get, Peter, is astonishing. It's people that say this, Luke, I booked to go to Queensland, she shut the borders, so I thought, well, fair enough. I then booked again, and then she shut the borders. Luke, I'm not going back to Queensland. Now, I don't know how you get them back. The Premier said in that clip you played before, Peter, that, this is only for a few months. I don't know where she's coming from, but I'm pretty sure the international tourists are probably a year away. So it'll be a lot longer than that. She's done great damage to Tourism Queensland, and now she's going to have to pay for it.
And I think too, I listened a lot to you on radio over the summer. I think a lot of people feel unwelcome if they're not Queenslanders now.
Correct.
That's been the net result of a lot of this, and they're happy to go to Byron Bay or spend their money in South Australia and elsewhere. I think the same thing will impact WA tourism when McGowan gets past the next election, and odds on he'll win, and he tries to open up the border and kick things along. I think people feel quite jaundiced by the way in which this has all been handled. I want to just drill into that issue of economic recovery. We saw a report out yesterday. Commonwealth and state debt's through the roof. We're talking about $1.75 trillion in debt. A long time before we're going to get that paid off. And it'll be some time too before we even get the budget back into some sort of balance.
Yes.
When I hear these debates, I always wonder whether people really understand there's only one taxpayer. The bloke in Queensland or the woman in WA pays a state tax, and it's that same person that pays federal tax. There's not somehow a different way you collect the money in a state government sense and a different way in a federal government sense. We're only the same single individual. And of course, if Queensland needs bailing out, WA, Victoria, New South Wales will all be paying for it. And this is what I think she was warned about, wasn't she?
She was. And this plays in that I agree. I picked that up amongst our callers too. Those that felt really peeved that because they were born in or they live in New South Wales or Victoria or wherever else, they're a separate special group that we don't have to welcome here. And it is to some extent quite offensive because we are, aren't we? We're used to being able to go around. I mean, you go to the Service Paradise, the Gold Coast for your summer break, and then you might duck down to Victoria and go skiing in winter, and you just get about the place. But the border closures have changed that.
And it was made worse, wasn't it? Because the millionaires and the yachties were coming in, the AFL footballers and the others.
Yeah. Cricketers, all of that, you're right. So if you lived in one of those states or you were a celeb or a high-profile sporting person, even if that's not right, to the average Australian, it seemed right, and at the same time, it seemed completely wrong. So when things do turn a little bit nasty, like they seemingly are for tourism in Queensland, then, you know, there's not a lot of sympathy. I read the comments on your Facebook page. I was blown away by, the number of people that responded. I'd had trouble finding someone that said, you know, lay off, Queensland's done really well through this. There is that state of origin rivalry, Peter. There's a lot of people that don't like the idea that in the media, Gladys Berejiklian is held up as some kind of star. They generally cite Ruby Princess. And, you know, to some extent that's fair, although I watched every minute of that inquiry. And it came down to a decision made on the night of the arrival, which was so early in this. And the government did something about it, acted. The inquiry was far-reaching, and it was, I think, a lot deeper than the one that was conducted in Victoria. So I'm going to give Gladys a thumbs up there. She dealt with the problem, and they moved through it, I think, pretty well.
And I'll just make one point, having worked on the inside of government. When you have to do something like this in emergency situations, you will make mistakes. Yeah. And I'm not down on Daniel Andrews making mistakes. Yeah. I'm down on Daniel Andrews not admitting to them, not apologising to them, and not fixing the mistakes when he could. All the way through his situation in Victoria, he didn't remediate any of the issues. In fact, he compounded them. Berejiklian had issues absolutely around Ruby Princess. I think Brad Hazzard more than the Premier. But they learned from those errors, and she hasn't missed a beat since. Got to ask you, the big story out of Canberra clearly this week is Anthony Albanese. This reshuffle, supposedly minor to start with, is quite substantial. He's punished a few likely rivals. I mean, Tanya Plibersek had parts of her portfolio removed, and she's out there shaking her tail feather, I can tell you. Jim Chalmer, he's basically now got a competitor in Richard Marles in his economic portfolio. And surprisingly, there's a thing called the order of precedence, which is where they set in the picking order, and all the politicians care about it almost as much as where they sit on TV in question time. Well, Chalmers is said to be the rival to Anthony Albanese, although he's a bit young. He's been pushed right down the batting order there. So there's a lot of, feathers that are ruffled down there in Canberra. What do you make of this reshuffle, and will it save his bacon? Well,
I don't think it will. I think he'll go to the election. I think he'll lose. Well, I want to say spectacularly, but things tighten up, as we know. Queensland's a problem child. Chalmers is in Queensland. He's pretty good in the media. He is of the left, and he is not that well known, but he's important. Tanya Plibersek has got a gig on 2GB. My God. Yes. So, as you say, shaking the tail.
That tells you she's campaigning.
She's campaigning, all right. Exactly right. Richard Marles, Bill Shorten had that piece a couple of days ago. Gee, there's no shortage of candidates, but who'd want to be a Labor leader going up against Scott Morrison during the pandemic, given the way Australia has seemingly sailed through it? That's not excusing the nearly 900 or 900 people who've died. That's a tragedy. But, my God, as it's often been said, you wouldn't want to be sick anywhere else, would you?